Welcome to Curious Christianity. Today I have a very special guest, Jana Harmon, who has recently written a book entitled Atheists Finding God. I actually had the pleasure of meeting with her at an apologetics conference a little while ago, and I'm very excited to talk with her about her book and some of her experiences and to kind of hear more about her journey as to why she wrote this and how she interacts with atheists. So, Jana, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's so great to be here with you, Adam. A true pleasure.
Yeah. So, why don't you tell me a little about yourself and kind of what's your background and how'd you end up coming to write this book anyway?
That is a good question. In a nutshell, I'm married to Stephen. We have two grown daughters, 21, 25, who are navigating this really precarious culture at the moment, one in Austin and one in Auburn, Alabama. So
Oh,
constant prayers there. But they're doing great. And we have a golden retriever, our only child left at home. But my first career really was as a speech pathologist,
really?
which in the hospital. So I worked with people who had problems with their voice, whether it would be from a professional singer to someone who had lost their voice box because of cancer.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, I'm gonna have to
yeah.
ask you for tips just to keep the voice going.
Yeah. So that was, I loved that. I loved working with people. I loved the hospital medical setting. But through that time, and just having two young daughters at the time, around the 2000, my husband and I were leading a small group in a church. They were seekers. And I quickly realized that I understood what I believed. I didn't understand why I believed it, other than, what I had learned in church all those years. And it really wasn't much more than, it's in the Bible, Bible's amazing. But the questions that were coming at us were a lot more substantive than that, other worldviews. And I was caught flat footed. So it set me on a journey of truth seeking, because I wanted to understand what was happening actually in my hospital environment, where everybody, was in God and everything was God. And I was like, this doesn't feel right. And then, the seeker oriented group, I'm like, there is truth, and there's got to be a way to know it and to ground
So you
my,
said hospital environment.
yes.
Did you mean church or did you mean an actual
I
hospital?
I mean, when I worked in a hospital.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
it was a religious hospital, but it was a very, I would say they were very universalistic in their thinking, and they brought in a lot of alternative ideas into the hospital and healing. And I began to become troubled about where's truth. I mean, if there's God, then God reveals himself in a certain way. And so both at church, when I was working with the seekers, and at work, I was being confronted with these alternate ideas of what truth was.
Mm.
So, yeah. So I it was at that point where the Lord very distinctly pointed me towards Biola, and a degree in Christian apologetics. I was a total babe in the woods, as it were. I jumped in the deep end of the pool. My first class was philosophy of religion, and the textbook was William Lane Craig's. And I understand very quickly there there was so much I didn't know in my pursuit of truth, but the Lord was very gracious about that. And over a 3-year period, f- helped me understand the fullness, the richness, the depth of the Christian worldview and its grounding. And um, so that pursuit of truth really gave me, again, a confidence in the Christian worldview. But to your question on how the apologetics jumped to the book that I wrote, or the research that I conducted with former atheists, when I graduated with that degree, that was in 2008. I was in the apologetics world,
Mhm.
and oftentimes in the apologetics world, there's a comparison of worldviews. Atheism or naturalism, as contrasted with theism or Christianity, were often, put side by side. And I figured that if the Christian worldview held its weight, that it was robust and fully, the best explanation for reality, it should be believed or believable by skeptics.
Mhm.
But I found that it wasn't. Whether in writing or debating, it seemed that the Christian would often and the atheist would often speak past each other. There didn't seem to be a coming together of the minds. It didn't seem to be convincing, especially for the stalwart skeptic. And I thought, well, again, if reason evidence is on the side of the Christian worldview, which I deeply believed that it was, I wanted to understand why the skeptic didn't believe it, didn't believe the arguments, even would even say that there is no evidence. That was nonsensical to me.
So
So
I
yeah,
have a question about that
yeah,
because it seems to me, right, that your life growing up was very much that of a churchgoer. Was that right?
that's correct.
You kind of grew up in the home. And so now you're just confronting atheism kind of on the front in these later years in college. Is that right?
Really, yeah. When I was actually in midlife. I was 40 years old or
Yeah.
44 when I started going to graduate
So did it
school.
have the feeling of kind of almost the first time a young girl is leaving the house? Did it have that kind of feeling where it's like, whoa, now you're seeing the world and the world is it's a little rougher, right? It's not the
Mhm.
same thing as being at home, being around your church friends and stuff like that. And now people are coming with objections and reasons why everything you believe is wrong and false. And
Mm. Yeah, I would call myself a late bloomer. I think that there are many Christians who are in a Christian bubble, who stay in what they call a holy huddle and are
Mhm.
comfortable there. But it's when you want to understand culture, when you want to reach your neighbor for Christ, then you start to experience again things that are not what you believe. And I'm embarrassed almost to say that it took me to midlife until I started encountering really other ideas in a serious way.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. There's somebody else that I know, and he actually also is having that experience, but he's even, I think he's probably, I would say that he has this experience after his 50s, even.
Mm,
So exactly way up there. And it was just kind of a massive, massive dynamic shifts in the way of his thinking and experiences. And because he just kind of lived in that, yeah, in the bubble, right? And then reality and the rest of life kind of hit him and was rather overwhelming, I would say, for him. So
but it can be overwhelming, but it's also like an entrance in a way. The Lord seeks to transform our mind. And it really transformed my mind, my understanding of the fullness of reality, and that the Lord Jesus Christ is God over all of reality and reveals himself over all of reality and through reality. And it was incredible for my Christian faith and walk, but it also, we're called to grow. And so it was it's difficult though when you start encountering alternative ideas and pushback. And but the reality is we are living in a culture where you can't avoid that anymore. Even as
mhm.
a Christian living, in a holy huddle, we are with social media and what's going on in culture, you cannot avoid the onslaught of ideas that are coming against the Christian worldview at the moment. As much as you try to hide, it's very difficult to do, unless you just turn all technology off.
Yeah, you could do it if you turn off the technology. But yeah, I kind of joke on like, Twitter and all of that, that Christians and atheists, they're the best of friends because they spend all their time talking together. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, like for myself, I didn't really go on any of these social media platforms to meet atheists, but if I made a Christian post, there would be like plenty of atheists that all are ready to jump and pounce and want to comment on as to why it's wrong, why it doesn't make sense, and all these sorts of things. And it was rather unexpected at first glance to me, but now, yeah, it's just kind of par for the course.
Yeah, it's very expected.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The question for me now, though, is how do I respond? I think when I first started getting the onslaught of opposition online, I tried to again be gracious and respond with gentleness and respect, but substance and good
Uh,
questioning. But it became very obvious that really they weren't engaged mostly in an authentic interaction. And so
yeah.
now I get a lot of comments on why I'm not engaging
Mhm.
that are not very friendly. So it's a difficult area to manage or navigate social media as a Christian.
It is for sure. It is for sure.
Mhm.
So let's see. All right. See, behold, I have it right here. This is her book.
Mm.
And so I'm very curious. So, one, just tell us a little bit about what is the book about?
The book is where I mean, it's asking the question, what would it take for an atheist to become a Christian?
Mhm.
And indeed, what did it take? So I went on an investigative journey to look at that question. Are those questions by surveying and interviewing 50 former atheists to hear their stories, to hear why they rejected God, to hear why they embraced atheism as an identity, as a way of looking at the world. I wanted to know what would breach their resistance. I wanted to know what they, as atheists, their perspectives on God, Christians, Christianity, the Bible. Again, what would open the door toward anything other than or anything beyond atheism, even if it's not Christianity. I wanted to look at their journeying towards faith because all of these 50 former atheists eventually became passionate followers of Christ. Wanted to look at their journey, their transformation, and actually their advice for us as Christians on how to engage with skeptics. So,
See, you know what seemed a little different to me about your book than maybe some others was I actually felt like it had a much larger degree of authenticity. You were like genuinely curious even. You just
yes,
wanted to know like why do you do this? How do you do this? How do you change? And did you really get the sense like because I feel like some other apologetics books, they're books against atheism or talking about atheism, but in a much more combative style, you know? And this book was honestly almost like seriously exploratory, where it was you wanted to understand. You wanted to understand not only what they were thinking, but just their heart, their full psychology. I think that was probably one of the most interesting things to me about your book was that it covered a broad spectrum. You didn't just cover intellectual arguments, but you wanted to see the whole person, right?
that's exactly right. Because again, I felt the intellectual argument for Christianity was very robust.
Mhm.
So there had to be something more, had to be something more, causing resistance, allowing openness. And so I think it goes back to, my heart in working with that little seeker oriented group. My heart at the bottom of this is for people to know Jesus
Mhm.
and to people to find life that's truly life. And so I felt like there were a lot of apologetics books out there,
Mhm.
contending for the Christian faith. I tend to see apologetics through a much more practical lens. I want to see how apologetics hits with the lives of people and how and in what way it makes a difference and how it can move someone towards truth, towards Jesus, towards life. So I wanted to take a very holistic look at why we hold beliefs that we do, how we can come to be open to change, and then on towards belief in God.
So I think it's I love that aspect of talking about change because it's a question that really bothered me, and it's a question that I constantly asked myself was how does somebody change their beliefs? How do they go from believing this, you know, to believing something else? Did you really feel like it's hmm, it's I'll put it this way. I really felt like your book captured this idea that it's not just linear. Some people think if they just argue the right way, well, that'll do it. And then other people think that actually almost nothing you do even matters, right? Maybe take a strong deterministic stance. Well, God, if God's going to do it, then he's going to do it. So all I need to
Mm.
do is preach the gospel, right? And that's it. And then just stand back. What would you say to people who just think that I just preach the gospel and then step back and let whatever happens happen?
I think, in all due respect, you're not meeting someone where they are. I think the one and done kind of approach, or even, I'm just gonna present this formulaic, you know, thing. I think that used to be a lot more effective in a culture where Christianity was more plausible, more
Mhm.
understood. The concepts of it were people understood who Jesus was, God was. They looked at it as a good thing, as a moral thing, as something upright. Now we're in a completely different culture. It's a different cultural moment where sometimes, a lot of times, people don't only understand Christianity through what they're getting on television or through film, and that's usually not a positive or representation. It's through
Mhm.
social media. It's through ridicule. It's through ad hominem argument. Putting up
Yeah.
straw men and caricaturing and negative hue. And so people don't really even understand what Christianity is. They don't understand what sin is. They
Mhm.
don't know who God is.
Yeah,
They
the
have
context is so different today.
yeah, the anthropology has really changed their understanding of self. They don't even know who they are. They have to create themselves. We are living in such just a very different time where I think one and done approaches are not taking into account who the individual is, who they define themselves to be, what their understanding of reality is, what their objections are to religion, to people of faith. They don't know. All they hear are sound bites or clips, or the Bible is this, or the Christians are just that, or they there's a lot less understanding. So I think to be effective, we need to enter in and engage people where they are, not where we think that they should be. Um,
Mhm.
and so it's just a very different time, and we need to take a lot more nuance with it. And it's yeah, so
So what was kind of the most eye-opening thing from your studies?
wow, so much, so much.
Just pick like a highlight or so. Something
Let's
that
pick a highlight. I think probably, let me see how I can say this. One of the most surprising, in a good way, things that I found about this study is that, even though there's very strong resistance and separation between skeptics and Christians, 82% of those who actually opened the door towards considering something else, considering God or Christianity, was because they had a positive engagement or encounter or prolonged engagement or encounter relationship with a Christian.
Mhm.
Um, there's there's oftentimes an us thin mentality, and then this false understanding of who the other is. But those negative stereotypes can be broken down by an authentic, embodied picture of who Christ is and who Christians are, whether it's goodness or intelligence or just being normal,
So
being
would you say like personal interaction played such a much larger role? So like in my opinion as well, right? Like I've just noticed such a significant difference, especially when we're talking about ideas, that when we're having conversations, something different takes place because now the ideas no longer are just abstract ideas, right?
Yes.
Now it has a face to it, right?
Yes.
And even I've noticed when even the arguments haven't actually changed that much, when it actually has a face to it, to me the other person, they soften towards the idea because it's no longer just an idea. Now it's, well, Daniel has that idea. Now it's
Right.
Jana has that idea.
Yes.
It's got some personal interaction with it. And
Mhm.
even while they might still disagree, now it's like, well, I might disagree, but they're not crazy.
Yes. Yes, sometimes it's just that, sometimes just knocking the animosity or the contempt down a bit, where you're saying, "Well, yeah, I can't." Like, there was one former atheist who was watching he and his roommates were watching debates between William Lane Craig and an
Hmm.
atheist, and he came away from that saying, "Well, I can't say that Christianity is stupid anymore. That's
Hmm.
all I can say." Or there was, of course, he went on to look further at the evidence and became convinced by it. But that was his first step. He just can't dismiss it out of hand like he thought. Or now he was more intellectually driven. There was another young woman who had been really harmed by a legalistic form of Christianity,
Hmm. Yep.
um, and she entered. Long story short, she entered into this seeker-oriented Christian environment and just spewed her vitriol to the small group leader who, the small group leader was like, "Well, that's legitimate," and just to have somebody validate her
Yeah.
and then actually love on her.
Hmm.
She said, I all I can say right now is I don't dislike you anymore."
Yeah.
And that is a first step. And
Mhm.
sometimes that's the best first step you can. I mean, you'll take that,
Yeah.
right? It's a step in the right direction, and it's this disarming nature, whether, it's an intelligent Christian who holds to a view that they can actually legitimately defend, or a normal, person who's actually extending value
Mhm.
towards someone. There was a man who had been very, very damaged by a traumatic event in his childhood. He hated Christians, hated religion, hated everything. And then he was asked in to sit down by some Christians and have a cup of tea because his wife had become a Christian. He hated that too.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
just but his first response was, "And they treated me like I was a human,
Yeah.
like I had value." Now that it's the disarming nature of personal engagement that can oftentimes be a door opener or a
Mhm.
diffuser of some sort of contempt that allows someone to see more clearly beyond the emotion, or beyond the hatred, or even the arrogance, I
Yeah.
guess, of their own perspective, dare I say,
Yeah.
to say, "Well, you know what? There is actually something valid, something substantial, something good in the other perspective."
So this is my perspective at the moment is that actually I was telling some other friends, because I've been involved in a bunch of Twitter spaces or these different things in social media, and as I'm a part of some different conversations, and some of them where there are Christians and religious people in these conversations, and they're atheists, and there's just this plethora of different views. And so, what I've been trying to encourage some more of my friends is simply to be present, to be present. Because
Mm,
as I've sat in on so many of these conversations, they don't need like these really, really intellectual things. And so at the moment, I'm of the opinion, not that apologetics is bad, but what's really needed are more Christian influencers. And I don't necessarily mean that with the negative connotation of influencers, but you need more Christians just to be present.
mm,
Because the questions that I'm end up answering in some of these spaces, they're questions that I'm quite confident any of my friends could have answered. They're not extremely difficult, or complex questions about the Bible or all the philosophical stuff that I've studied, it's just like you just need a serious Christian to be present and to help answer really simple, basic questions. And I do empathize with those that have had negative Christian experiences and some of those that render those against Christianity. And I as well just kind of want to agree with him. It's like, yeah, hey, look, I'm sorry that you had those experiences and that was terrible. And I mean, even many Christians will go through church hurt and bad personal experiences with
Mhm.
other believers or pastors or, I've seen a lot of those things. But that doesn't mean we can't continue to point to Christ. And I just think that more and more you just need somebody present in the lives of these other people. Because there are people that they've never met a Christian. They don't have any friends. And I actually have in the United States met a girl who had no idea who Jesus was at all. Like I completely had to explain who Jesus was. Some people think that's completely crazy, but it's like, look, they actually do exist. Some
Yes.
people have no clue who Jesus is. And so I think that has become, we've kind of become inoculated to the idea of living in the United States that everyone knows who Jesus is, but it's not true, oddly enough. But yeah, just being present and being present in other people's lives and being a part of their lives can go a long way.
Yes, being present and reaching out, it can make all the difference in the world. I have so many stories where the Christian made the difference when, you know, perhaps someone like there's a woman who became critically ill. She was so derogatory towards Christians, but she had met a Christian in her AA group. And then she became critically ill, and all of her intellectual friends and deserted her. But there was this one Christian who came, and she said, "I just needed to be loved."
Mm.
And Mary was the one who did that. I'm reminded too. I mean, it can be so simple. My daughter, I mentioned, goes to Auburn, and there's a friend of hers. I just saw this happen yesterday or 2 days ago, so it's very fresh on my mind. This a friend of hers just saw a young man who seemed so troubled online, just struggling with his identity and just so many problems in his life. And she was drawn just to message him and just befriend him, invited him to church. And I saw him become baptized on Sunday. Very powerful story. Sometimes, especially in this time where so much loneliness and this isolation abounds, people are craving relationships and genuine friendships and people who care. And sometimes it's amazing to me what a little hospitality or generosity or availability will do in the lives of others. And of course, having the understanding of who Christ is and being able to to bring that forward and having good answers is a part of that too. Everyone is searching. There's a tremendous meaning crisis out there now, and we have, we have what people are looking for. Everyone has basic needs of wanting to be known and loved and valued and accepted and belong and for their lives to mean something. And
Mhm.
we have that person who offers that. We know Jesus. It is a shame that people don't even know who Jesus is. But we have the one who actually offers life, and presence can make all the difference.
So your book is really about atheists who have ended up converting to Christianity, right?
Right.
And in that whole process, you pretty much do a case study, right? Of like a bunch of atheists who have converted and looking for commonalities. Are
Mhm.
there some commonalities that have just stood out above others? Because I know in evangelistic processes in church, I hear very strongly from some, oh, this is the correct approach. Oh, this is the correct approach. So what's the correct approach, Jana? I mean, I just want to convert all the atheists and
Yeah.
we're here. We have come
Uh,
to the foot of Jana to
oh
to get the
my.
knowledge.
Well, one of the interesting questions for me was, if most of the time when you hear someone, you say, "Why don't you believe in God?" And they'll give you rational reasons or intellectually driven reasons.
Of
And I
course,
think
because Christianity is void of rationality, right?
sure, sure. And there is truly, I mean, demographically speaking, there is for the atheists, they are generally speaking have a they are higher intellect, more educated. So even my book targeted educated atheists, and there was something in me that wanted to show, well, if again if it Christianity is robust intellectually, even educated atheists can believe it's true. It's not just run of the mill, people who think critically about their own lives and their own worldview. But I wanted to know if they say they reject Christianity for intellectual reasons, did they become open to Christianity for intellectual reasons? You know,
Mhm.
I thought that was a good question to
That
ask.
is a very good question. I like that. That's a really good question. Yeah.
So that's why I wanted to really delve into so many aspects of the whole of the person. Did they
Mhm.
move forward? Because in the academic world, they say that people become Christians just because of for social reasons. They want to belong
Mhm.
to a group, or just because of psychological reasons. We need a coping mechanism for their life. Was it those reasons? Was it an argument, a piece of evidence? Was it an experience? What was it? And so they gave their own opinion about it.
Yeah.
But I also observed through their life and their language what really moved them. And long story short, let me just make this premise that Blaise Pascal said a long time ago that people move mostly towards their beliefs because they find them attractive,
Uh-huh.
not necessarily on the basis of proof. And we are all driven by our desires of what we want to be true, what we think is good, what we want for our lives. And then oftentimes we rationalize that. We're all guilty, not just Christians, not just atheists.
Yeah.
We all do that. I love my scone in the morning. It's not the best thing for me, but it tastes good and I want it. I want what I want. But there has to be something what I found was for 80% the door. Now, let me just also say the reasons for door opening or the catalyst are
Mhm.
different than the reasons for conversion. I want to make that clear.
Okay, yeah. I'm definitely
So,
interested in that. And I
you,
really love the fact that you mentioned this idea of catalyst.
yes. And where I think the academics stop short is they'll give the reason for the catalyst as the reason for conversion, and that's not the
Okay.
case.
So
That's not
there's
what I
two
found.
different things. Okay.
So what I found, though, what was interesting to me is that 80% opened the door towards another perspective because of something good about it, that God mattered in some way. Whereas, God's existence, the truth, whether it's true or not, that's one issue. But does it matter to my life? Was what opened the door. They began to see something good or relevant or needed for
Mhm.
their life that they weren't finding in their own worldview. That was the door opener. But that again is different than questing towards and believing in. That's a different question. What brought them to conversion? But just consideration was that there was something they found attractive that was surprising, or that they weren't finding in their own life that was satisfying them intellectually, um, existentially. They weren't finding meaning, purpose, value. They weren't able to find. They were looking for something more. Or they say they were in a crisis point, and their worldview wasn't up to the task of dealing with their crisis at hand. Um, they would potentially disarmed by a Christian and saw again something good, or even challenged by a Christian
Mhm.
in some way. But predominantly, it was this idea that somehow it's more attractive, good, that it mattered. It
Mhm.
mattered for them personally. So they were willing to consider it.
So if that's now that what you're saying is those are the catalysts, right? That's kind of the catalyst.
Yeah, yeah, that it prompted them towards perhaps there's something
Right.
different or more.
And so I love the idea of catalyst because I feel like I've seen that so often, and I've seen it so often when people do change their minds. And this idea of so you list actually several different kind of catalysts for people. One of them is the intellectual catalyst, right? And
Right.
that's where they start to run against this idea of like what I'm saying doesn't make sense, right? And I mean, I felt that as I've changed my mind or position on different positions over time, right? Where you start to run into what you feel like is your own logical contradiction, right? You're talking about it, and then all of a sudden somebody might ask you a question or hit you with something, and you're like, "Wait a minute, wait, no, wait, hold on, let me figure this out." And you're just like, and then you come back to it again and again, and you're like, "This just doesn't make sense."
No,
Um,
exactly, like, there were several, and it can cut across many, many things that ground the Christian that are grounded in the Christian worldview, like morality, for example,
mhm,
it's so natural, intuitive for us to say, "No, that's, what happened there was really wrong,
yeah,
and I know it to be wrong, and I'm gonna talk about it and proclaim it and defend for it," whatever, but they, they couldn't ground it's not that you can't know it, but you just can't ground that morality in
yeah,
anything, and they were honest enough with themselves that they were calling God a moral monster, but yet based upon what?
yeah,
Or whatever the case might have been. So they're seeing internal conflicts. I remember one guy saying, I was making all of these truth claims, but I couldn't ground truth, or I was thinking and I was acting, but I was really in reality not much more than a Coke can fizzing. I was just
mhm,
responding. I couldn't ground even my own thoughts and rationality more than survival and instinct. And those are deep, and those can undo someone who is actually honest and a deep thinker and rational about their own perspectives. I mean, even the great atheists will say, yeah, morality is a useful fiction, or we don't know how we know things, or we don't know how consciousness arose, but it's just a great, we 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 just believe it, or life isn't,
mhm.
it's just, or even like Camus, admitting that the life is absurd, but we have to act as if, that is meaningful. Well, that's a contradiction, isn't it? You, the irony here is that Christians are called the ones who believe in illusions, but the atheists are actually the ones who admit to it.
Mhm.
That they're admitting that they have to actually believe in things that are useful fictions in order to propagate or survive or make it through life. And so, for those who are intellectually honest, they become disillusioned with their own perspective, and at least intellectually or rationally, they can see where it's not grounding the things that they hold important beauty. Again, morality, human dignity, for example. I was just listening to Sarah Stone. Oh goodness, I can't remember her last name, but that was really disconcerting for her when she listened to Peter Singer say, "No, from a utilitarian perspective, we are no different, no more valuable than any other thing in the physical universe or the cosmos." That's a very disconcerting idea for someone who holds human dignity and value to be important, that we are different than everything else in the physical cosmos. So it's, yeah, that happened, certainly. Intellectually, it can come from the thing is it can come, that catalyst can come from inside, but it can also be someone actually challenging someone from the outside, putting a stone in your shoe, or having like you do, Adam, just asking those interesting questions about making people think about their own worldview in a way that they perhaps hadn't
So
before.
if that's the catalyst, then
Mm.
how do we get to the conversion?
Some of it has to do with the the skeptic's willingness to quest.
Okay.
Sometimes there's a disconcertion, and it depends on an internal motivation to either find out what's true or to disprove. And a lot of them their first step was towards, I'm going to disprove Christianity. I'm going to disprove all religions as nonsense.
So kind of like the Lee Strobel story.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to move in. I'm going to wipe it away.
Yep.
And
Let
then,
me let me use all my intellect and techniques and
yeah.
research, and I'm just gonna show them why they're wrong.
Yeah. But whether it's that disprove and first, and then there's a determination towards truth. So sometimes it's disprove first and then a determination towards truth. And others, if it's an internal longing, I would say there's a much more openness from the beginning to determine what is true. So then they typically go on a quest, if they're intellectually bent, to actually
Mhm.
look at and are usually dumbfounded by the profundity of what's there. We have an embarrassment of
Yeah.
riches in
So
terms of what's there. Yeah.
and that was really my story. Like, for me, I was very truth oriented. I'm still truth oriented, but that was, like, the driving force for me. Like, I was willing to chase after truth no matter the cost. It didn't matter if I did. I had to reject the faith of my entire family, all of my friends. Truth mattered to me. It was a central core value.
Mm.
And yeah, I was going to chase it down no matter what the cost. Now, part of my problems at the time was that I really only accepted rational truth, right? The stuff that I could understand mentally. And so I was
Mhm.
very much, I just resonate so much with so many of these atheists they're incredibly intelligent. They're very rational in their thinking, and they're only willing to accept those things. But for me, one of the major breaking points that was very liberating for me later on, like I did find rationality in the Christian faith, but something that was additionally liberating because of looking at human beings as a holistic person, were experiential truths. The experience of the Holy Spirit, the experience of connecting with
Mhm.
God, the experience of what it's like to be forgiven and have that feeling of liberation. um, and then, of course, C.S. Lewis, right? C.S. Lewis is surprised by joy, right? The joy that God can give you and the peace that can come with knowing Christ. And so I now understand and recognize so much more that there are also these experiential truths, existential truths that matter far beyond merely how we think about things. So, yeah, I don't know. That's part of how, to me, I really resonate. And I mean, to be honest, it's sort of funny reading your book, because I felt like I've been through and seen almost every aspect that you're talking about. Like, oh, the different kinds of catalysts is like, yep, I remember those. I remember these different kinds of experiences. I remember how they kind of connect here and here, and how at different points, right? Like, because to me, this is like over a life's of journey. Like, you might only think about something in just a rational sense at one point, but then also you might have several catalysts, right? Maybe it's the rational aspect that begins to open up your willingness, and then it's, whatever, the emotional or experiential one or the social one. But yeah, I just recognize how much all of those aspects, because you have one of them, it's kind of the socio-cultural aspect, right? The
Right.
idea of somebody spending time with other Christians and believers very much impacts their thoughts and how they think.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, experientially, I mean, to pick up on what you were talking about, I mean, I love that you're just even bringing forward the idea of forgiveness, because I think as Christians, it's something we hear about all our lives. It's something we've kind of
Mhm.
taken for granted, and I think it's also something that people who don't know or experience forgiveness or know what that means, it is it's huge. I mean, sometimes there's a resistance that I don't need forgiveness. I'm not a sinner. What's all that about? But there, when all you have to do is look at culture, this cancel culture that we're in, where there is no forgiveness. It's only, dredging up the sin that you committed back in high school or
Mhm.
whatever, and let's parade it around and talk about how horrible you are, and then push your way in a dungeon and lock you there, with no no sign of forgiveness at all. I mean, even the intellectual Doug Murray has been talking. He calls himself a Christian atheist because he although he rejected Christianity, he understands the value of the Christian worldview and its underpinnings of Western society. But he also understands the value of forgiveness. He said, Christianity's weird. Yeah, you need to be weird, because weird in a good way, you offer forgiveness. Other
Mhm.
worldviews don't have that. They don't offer that. And,
Yeah.
we all know we're broken. We all know we need something. And this offer forgiveness sometimes is just, like you say, Adam, it just can be the most amazing experience to be so known, yet so loved. I mean, and you
Mhm.
also mentioned spiritual experience. There were a number of spiritual experiences. I think some of the really profound ones, like whether it was an encounter with Christ or a dream that someone had, where, and it's very similar to if you read near death experiences much. And when someone encounters the holiness of Christ, they feel this sudden profound awareness of their own filth and sin, but yet this overwhelming love and forgiveness at the same time by this person, Christ. It's just life changing. And those were some of the surprising elements that I saw. But thirdly, I would say, too, to your point, not only are we satisfied intellectually, but we are so, and spiritually, through Christ and Christianity, but we are satisfied existentially. That is, we all crave, again, to be known, to be loved, to have a
Yeah.
life of meaning and purpose. And again, we're seeing so much lostness in that way in our culture now. I hear story after story of anxiety and depression and loss and suicidal thoughts and on and on, and particularly in the younger generation, has been so captured by social media and this idea that we have to invent ourselves and we have to invent our own identity. And there's no sturdy or firm foundation. It's a culture that's built on sand, and it's just so unsettling. And to find that it's in Christ that we find everything that we're seeking. I mean, the basic humanness of who we are, our identity, that we are worthwhile, that we are doing something, that our life is worthwhile, that it's meaningful, that we are living for a grander story. That is something, there's something that I call existential oughtness. We all have this sense of what life ought be, and it's only found in Christ. And so when people find that, it's so life changing. And
Can
that,
I find
yes.
that this side of heaven? Can I have that this side of heaven?
Well, I would say yes. I mean, the promise is an abundance in Christ. There's a satisfaction that we can
Mm.
have that the world does not offer. And when he talks about abundance, it's not physical or material. It's spiritual.
Mhm.
And those are the things that he promises: peace, joy, love, all the fruit of the spirit that come when we embrace Christ. That patience, long suffering, endurance, grace, generosity, hospitality, all those things that we find when we are in Christ, with the people of Christ. And I believe that we can, of course, it will be fully met when we're in the life to come, really. But eternal life starts when you
Yeah.
are in Christ. So
Mhm.
we have crossed over, John says, from death into life. It's life that's truly life. And I believe that we can have it now. And it's,
Amen.
yes,
Amen. Yeah, yeah. No, I think that that's so important. And, I just think that, you know what? I think it's one of the greatest fulfillments. Like C.S. Lewis has this argument from desire that, there's the oughtness, right? The longing in the human soul. And to me, the great thing about Christianity is, yeah, Christ can fulfill that. Right, he
yes.
fills in that gap, and that is something that I don't at all believe that you have to wait for. You don't have to wait to
Mhm.
die to obtain it. It's something that he offers to us now. He offers to us that forgiveness, joy, contentment, sense of meaning, purpose, validation. um, and yeah, and we have to strive for it. We have to strive for it. It's a constant process. At no point will we ever know the ends or depths, and our relationship will always grow with Christ, but we can begin that now and have that sense of journey and fulfillment, and that's really a beautiful thing.
Yes, I know people say this a lot, but it's so true from Augustine, our hearts are restless until we find our rest in him, in
Oh,
in
that's a
Christ.
good line.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's really good.
yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, hmm. So in all of your studies, was any of your studies about hearing all of these other guys' circumstances and situations, was that a struggle for you to listen to?
I will say that this is a unique group of people, and to be honest, the joy that they spoke of in their life was palpable, their passion for Christ. So you have to understand even though there was a lot of brokenness on the front end, and there were stories of severe brokenness and hardship for many. Others were happy atheists, fine without God, and there wasn't a traumatic event in their life, and sometimes I think there's a mischaracterization or broad brushing of all as a certain story or a certain narrative, and we need to be very cautious about that. But I was sitting across from people who were redeemed. I know that's a Christian legalese word, redeemed. That means someone who had actually found life in Christ
Mhm,
despite all that had happened. And so their brokenness was kind of made whole. So they didn't resent their past. The, although there was, I will say, palpable contempt and anger coming forward towards God or towards Christianity when they remembered their life as atheists, but they had come forward from that. They had been healed in a sense from that. The It was all kind of, it was left to me, not forgotten, but in a way forgiven or healed. So, and they could see how in many cases God used the brokenness of their past to have led them to the point where they were. So because it wasn't difficult for them, oftentimes you pick
mhm.
up, you know, the pain from the person who, or the anger from the person you're speaking with. And there were elements of that, but it wasn't palpable in the way that they felt it in the past. It was a remembrance, and so, but of redemption, a redemption that their life had been meant for something so much more. And so it was a celebration of sorts. These people are passionate about their faith. These are not nominal believers. They understood the darkness and the depth of it, and they understood the light that they had walked into. And so it was, I get chills sitting here. There's no greater joy for me to have heard those stories, celebrate with them, and even continue to bring those stories forward.
Were there commonalities that they all shared, or are they kind of all just individualistic?
They rejected God sometimes for similar reasons. I will say every story is different, right?
Mhm.
But there were commonalities among why they rejected, different, like we talked about, different ways they came forward, like, in rejecting God. Um,
Well, and I think
or
it's I think
yeah,
it's
go ahead.
important and interesting, like, because honestly, yeah, that is to me what I felt like I read was that they are all individuals, and you
Yes.
kind of said that here, like, kind of like, well, obviously they're all individuals, but so you know what though, right? It, it's part of the atheist assertion that almost people only turn to Christianity for these narrow reasons. In other words, Christianity is about psychologically manipulating and tricking people. So I don't think it's obvious to everyone that, well, of course, everyone's individuals. They're like, no, no, no. These are people that they only turn to Christianity because they had a traumatic need or something like that. But I think that what you've really shown is a plethora, a wide berth. You have like all these different
Mhm.
categories, and it's spread all over the chart, which I found to be much more compelling, as opposed to the idea that, oh no, like 90% of them, they all turned to Christ because of this little itty bitty spot.
Yeah, I think just in the same way that atheists would hate to be broad brushed, you know,
Mhm.
about who they are and why they believe and how they became, uh, an atheist. The stories are completely different, but yet they share some commonalities, but everyone is unique. In the same way, Christians don't all come to faith in the same way, and they come to believe in different for different reasons in different ways. Everyone is an individual, and so I think to your former point, when we address those who don't believe, it's critically important to understand the person in front of you, um, to understand what they think, how they identify themselves as, atheist or skeptic, or you know, um, what they think atheism is, what it means, how it's affected their life, what different obstacles, what they think Christianity is, who God is, what their obstacles are to belief. They run as different as each individual story.
Yeah, yeah. I think that it's really interesting to think about human beings as more individuals rather than just some sort of blanket automatons, that as long as we punch the right buttons, people are all different. And that's why, like, I think about, let's think about Christian apologetics, right? We have scientific arguments, we have historical arguments, we have experiential arguments, we have philosophical arguments. I remember when I went to a community college and took intro to philosophy course. And I was actually, my purpose of going was actually to evangelize the campus, but I didn't want to take a subject that was going to be too much work, because I wanted to focus more on interacting and talking with people. And so I went, and it actually was rather life changing in a variety of ways. But one of the ways it was life changing was, we actually talked about arguments for God's existence. We talked about evil and good. And I constantly wanted to talk to a new student every chance that I got, and ask them, oh, what did you think of that one? What was your favorite? All these things. And I was stunned to see the plethora of responses. Some of them, like, for instance, one of the guys, yeah, for him, it was Pascal's wager. He thought that was the most interesting and compelling argument for God. And for others, yeah, it was the fine tuning type of stuff. And now this was not a Christian school, mind you. Okay. This was a secular college, and the professor did not claim to be a Christian or anything like that. Because usually he would build up the argument, and then by the end of class, he would tear it down.
Yeah.
um, but, and I remember asking, there was a young 17-year-old girl there, and I asked her what she was going to write her paper on. And to my surprise, it was on the ontological argument. She's like, oh, I just think this one makes the most sense to me. This one is clearly the
Wow.
one.
That's amazing.
And so it was exactly that. There's this wide berth of reasons, and everybody kind of had their own thing. And so I think sometimes I like to point that out when sometimes others ask me, what's the most powerful Christian argument? What's the best one? And it's like, Well, it depends. Depends on for who, because people have different answers and different things are more persuasive to them. So,
Absolutely. Agree with that. Absolutely, yes.
is there a story out of all these individuals that impacted you the most, though?
Oh, there were so many stories. Oh my. And so many continued stories that I have and that I hear. One I think is kind of funny, a little
Okay.
bit, funny in the sense that some of the most unexpected, people come to Christ in the most unexpected ways. There's a guy who was an atheist, history teacher in Australia. He had nothing to do with God, wanted nothing to do with God. He was a historian. Religion was bunk. He loved living what he even called a hedonistic life. Didn't want the morality of religion. That was just had nothing to do with that. Didn't understand how science and God could go together. He had to organize a, a field trip for his high schoolers. And he knew that there was this guy who was a Christian who taught in his high school, and he was desperate to
Mhm.
find chaperones for the trip. And he said, after I got everybody settled on the buses, it just so happened that the one seat on the one bus that was left was by this Christian guy. He said, I did not want to sit there. It's like the last place I wanted to be. And because, again, he had built up so many presumptions about who he thought Christians were, and it was not anything he wanted to be around. But he said it was so surprising. He said, the first thing I asked, he said, you teach science and you're a Christian. How is that possible?
Yeah.
So he said it got into this very interesting discussion over an hour bus ride. And he said, I started throwing questions to him and expecting a battle. He said, well, he was this very kind of calm, winsome, kind person who had substantive answers. And it just really put him back. He said, there's no way. I mean, it's just, it just opened the door. It was disarming. So after the retreat, he went home and he was a member of a book of the month club as a historian.
Mhm.
And he said it just so happened that this very next week they were featuring the book of the historical verification of the Jesus of Nazareth. And he said,
Okay. Yeah.
okay, I think somebody's trying to tell me something here. He said, I ordered it. He said, I read through it. I had no idea of the historical veracity, not only of the person of Christ in the first century, Near Eastern Palestine or whatever, but I had no idea of the historical verification or veracity of the resurrection. So it really then opened the door for him to further pursue. He started meeting with his friend, his Christian friend, once a week. And he said we would meet in a bowling alley. And so we would go bowling and then we would have this study and long story short, he ended up becoming convinced that the Christian worldview was correct, historically correct, and that the biblical worldview was the best explanation for what he saw and experienced. And by the time that I spoke with him, he had been to, he had put his job aside to try to take seminary classes. He was just so on fire for Christ. He had become the very thing that he once despised. And that it was so surprising to him. And I think that's, for me, when I say funny, I think God has a sense of humor in that sometimes the most unexpected people become the most prolific or the most um, just passionate about their faith, not only towards Christ, but passionate for others to know what they found.
So this was one that I wanted to know, though. A lot of the ones that, as far as I could tell, but I don't know for sure, they seem to come from kind of secular atheism to Christianity. Did you have some, or are you aware of some? And you might, as well, because we didn't even mention, you run a podcast, right? And you
Mhm.
talk to people who have converted from atheism to Christianity. But what about those who were Christians, deconverted? Do you see any of those coming back to Christ?
Yes, in my study, and she's been on my podcast, so I think I'm free to talk about her. Her name is Marie Wood, and I am sure many of your listeners might recognize her name, or at least her last name. She loved Jesus, loved Jesus. Wore a little T-shirt talking about how much Jesus loved her. Jesus was her friend, and she grew up and through high school with this really passionate love for Christ. But she asked her grandfather about something with regard to Christianity. He said, honey, there aren't real reasons for Christianity. Reason and faith don't go together.
Mhm.
So she dropped her faith because she's a very intelligent woman. And she went to college, and she ran into two guys on a debate team, David Wood, who's a very brilliant apologist, and Nabil Qureshi, who was at that time a Muslim apologist. He was trying to defend his Islam to David Wood, the former atheist Christian apologist. David, so she became friends with them and began to see that actually religion and faith has rational grounding, and she became convinced that the Christian faith had intellectual grounding, as did Nabil. They both became huge proponents for the Christian worldview, along with Marie. Now, there were others who were harmed by Christianity. I think I would say one of them was the young woman I mentioned earlier, who grew up with a very legalistic form of faith, and ended up she went on a long journey. Through Eastern faith, she found beauty but no substance in Eastern faith. Dated uh, Muslims and atheists, and explored temples and mosques, and had a real heart for people and wanted to find a place of belonging and acceptance, but ended up through a bad just experiences in life, and losing a good friend through a car accident. She just hated God, but somehow heard a pastor on the radio talk about something with regard to the fact that the resurrection could be grounded historically. Again, she thought, seriously, that's true, and she went just out of curiosity to see and to listen to someone who actually could put the two together, because she was a thinker as well, even though she'd been harmed by faith. And she was the one who entered into that small group, just kicking and screaming basically how much she hated God. And through a series of, it was relational. That one, I think, was a mending, a listening, a valuing of her relationally, but also finding answers. It was a process over time that there had to be kind of spiritual healing, emotional healing, as well as intellectual substance that provided enough for her to see that it wasn't not just true, but necessary for her life.
Mhm.
So, again, oftentimes it's not just a one note, it's a process, and it's holistic. uh, for many, particularly those who've been damaged not only in the church but through life experience, like the young man who experienced trauma in his life and hated God and hated religion. Um, it's a very holistic healing through the people of Christ, but also what they can find in the substance of what's actually there, supporting the
Mhm.
reality of Christ.
So, what do you make of all of those who are deconverting now? Right, we have many Christians now. There's almost a deconversion movement, and I've been seeing a bunch of them, and now there are YouTube channels that are popping up that are virtually predicated on that very notion.
There's a few things I have to say about that.
Okay. You
And
sound like you have more than a few things, but
yeah, they're popping in my mind. I hope I can hang on to them. But I think part of the first part of what I would say about the atheist movement is, as Justin Barley has well brought out, and it's common knowledge now, that the atheist movement is not just intellectual. It's capturing, if I can call it this, the woke segment of society, the oppressed, the LGBTQA movement, where there's a real fracturing among the atheist movement. Again, that there are those who are just more rational, modernist in their perspective, and those that are more postmodern, that are more culturally in tune with, the underdog and what's going on in culture, and then they're embracing that and making that part of their atheism.
Mhm,
That's the backdrop for legalism and hard monolithic forms of Christianity, where if you take out one part of the Jenga puzzle, the whole of Christianity falls down. There's also a seeming insensitivity of Christianity to cultural, movements that are going on that are more progressive in nature, that some people don't think that Christians are responding appropriately to certain, again, movements within culture that we should be attuned to. And so they're willing to leave this form of judgmental, intolerant Christianity behind in order to embrace what seems to be the goodness of culture. There seems to be, and I found this actually, um, among the atheist population too. Sometimes there's a rejection mentality. So it's a rejection, um, movement towards, I know what I don't want to believe, or that I don't
mhm,
believe in God. I don't believe in this form of Christianity. It's bad. It's evil. It's not good. But they don't fully understand and understand what they're embracing.
mhm,
So they move away from bad to what they think is good, but they don't understand the fullness, the implications, the logical endpoints of what they're embracing, that they're losing what they're losing by when they lose God and lose the grounding for
mhm.
human dignity itself, or the ability to even call something good or bad.
So
So,
that yeah, that
yeah.
right there was something that I really knew that you were kind of in tune with what atheism was doing today. So for instance, I think for a lot of people, they're not really in tune and understanding how atheists are going about. But I remember reading that in the early part of your book where you're talking about how, yeah, the new atheism, this is how they've defined atheism, is that, well, it's just a lack of belief in
Mhm.
God, right? And they just kind of avoid this. And if you're, on social media proclaiming Christianity, you'll run into this. But of course, I just think it's so ludicrous. So one of these guys, I was talking with him, and he's explaining, he's a very intellectual, he's got his PhD and all of this stuff, and writer of books. And yeah, I was like trying to talk about that. And he's like, well, no, I don't believe in God, but I'm not saying that God doesn't exist. And I'm just like,
Okay.
and this they
Okay.
find to be a meaningful distinction. It has some sort of meaning or purpose to them. And it's their way of saying that it's like, yeah, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God, but I don't have to defend anything because I'm not making any claims. And it's just like, that's kind
No,
of
it doesn't quite
kind
work
of
that way.
ridiculous. And
Yeah.
I was talking with my friend Daniel about that, and just like, it's like, yeah, my response is, well, I believe in God. I'm not claiming that he exists for this conversation, but I believe in him, so I don't really have to defend any claims for Christianity, because and it's just like, no, these are all absurd. But yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what do you mean, you believe or you don't believe? Or, and it's like, well, I believe, but I don't claim. So
That makes no sense. Yeah, but that's the card that's played though, right? It's
right.
so okay, so I'm not the one who's making the extraordinary claim that God exists. You're the one, Christian, who bears the burden of proof. I
Mhm.
just believe in lack of, a tooth fairy or Santa or God. I don't
Yeah.
have to prove the non-existence of God. The problem is that when you don't believe in the supernatural, then you have to explain everything through a naturalistic lens, that only nature exists, and we have to explain everything about the world and ourselves through that reductionistic lens. And that is a hard game to play.
Yeah. So I think that what concerns me for some Christians today is that they're not used to any of the rhetoric, of the new atheists, and most of them wouldn't even know how to respond to something exactly like that. It's like, well, no, atheism is what they call, sometimes some of them will say, the null hypothesis. It's just a non-affirmation, right? I don't believe in God. I don't believe in your God. Um, so are you actively involved in all of the combative arenas of apologetics and countering and arguing with atheists? When can we see your next debate? That sort of.
Yeah, that's not the game that I play either. There are those who are very good at it. That's not how I position myself. I
Mhm.
prefer conversations. And I am not a public debater or apologist in that sense. I like to bring stories forward of people who have actually moved through their own beliefs for
Mhm.
themselves, where they are the ones who have to battle reality for themselves, in a sense, where they have to battle the arguments and the evidence on their own terms, and that the person it's a practical, I guess you could say, apologetics, in a sense, where it's funny because I do put these stories forward, and there's this pushback, or that what's up with these stories? They don't mean anything. But they're stories of people who actually moved through the arguments and evidence for themselves. So you can't, first of all, you don't invalidate someone's experience. But second of all, they're very thoughtful, intelligent people who actually have looked at the arguments and evidence and the rational reasons for belief themselves. So I think that in and of itself is a compelling apologetic. I
Mhm.
think a testimony can be a compelling apologetic. I mean, look at the woman in the well. She went back to her hometown and said, Jesus, told me everything I ever did, and it convinced others to come see Jesus. And that's my goal, is to help people look to Jesus, and that these stories are testimonies pointing in that direction, substantive testimonies. So that's where I live.
So do you feel like you see the people change internally before they change intellectually, or is it the other way around?
I think it's part of an integrated process, right?
Okay.
It's kind of a chicken and egg. It depends on the person.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Someone might come across or have an awareness of, like the stone in the shoe thing, like they all of a sudden have awareness of, well, my worldview doesn't make sense. How
Yeah.
can I claim this when I actually assert that? I mean,
Mhm.
um, when that's not the case, I have no grounding for that. And so sometimes it is like Os Guinness has a presentation called The Thinking Man's Journey.
Mhm.
And he said that the thinking man will become dissatisfied with his own perspective, and then becomes open towards seeing another point of view. And it's that intellectual dissatisfaction that drives him to quest towards truth.
Mhm.
Whereas, again, for another, it may be that search for, there were about 25% who admittedly on survey said that they were actually looking for something more existentially, for meaning, purpose, value than their worldview offered. So it was the goodness that brought them towards an intellectual quest. But to
Mhm.
be clear, none of them so that they would believe unless they understood it to be true and God real,
Yeah.
despite the personal benefit. So that's very important, especially for the thinking person. Um,
So I want to talk about that though. All right. Because so I have this example because so there are intellectuals, right? And those are the ones that, that's all they do is think and stuff like that. And I often use this example about, let's just imagine that you're at church, and let's imagine you're one of the greeters or something like that. You're going to greet the new people, and so there's this new person that comes in, and let's just say it's a young woman, and she walks in and you can see that she's noticeably distraught, right? And she comes in, and you're like, hey, and you greet her and ask her how she's doing and stuff like that. And she says, oh, I'm terrible. My dad just died last night. Right. And your first response, of course, is, well, you just need to have more faith. I don't know why you're crying or upset or whatever. You just need to believe in God, put your trust in Him. This is really pretty inconsequential, right? Almost anybody, Christian or atheist, would find this to be an incredibly callous, terrible thing to say to somebody,
mm,
right? But now let's imagine a young man, right? Let's say he's a college age who walks in, and he seems well enough, and he's greeted and talks with somebody, and then he begins to ask question after question about the Bible, about the truth of Christianity, the veracity of it. And the person responds, well, you simply just need to have more faith. You just need to, don't worry about these trivial matters. You just need to believe in Christ and follow God. My point is that I don't actually think there's much of a difference between the first story and the second story. You've treated them almost the same, because the second person, the issue is those questions that he asks are incredibly important
mhm,
to him. They
absolutely.
they are. You're not regarding what he thinks or the questions he asks as valid or legitimate, and therefore you need to take great care, because for that person that's deeply grounding. Now, the reason I mention that in regards to what you said earlier with intellectual satisfaction, because I know what that feels like, is like to have a question that's gnawing at you. You know that there's a significant difference between somebody giving you an answer and somebody giving you an intellectually satisfying answer where you're like, okay,
Mhm,
that I can grab a hold of.
yes.
Right. So I feel like that there actually still is an emotional or internal component to the intellectual's questions.
Mm,
It's just viewed a little differently, because on the outside, the person who is the happy person, right? I mean, I could think of a few faces in my mind, right? Where they almost seem like they don't think about anything ever, but they are happy all of the time. I love those people. Man, it's hard to relate sometimes.
yeah.
But the difference, right, is just in how they're relating to that. And so I think for the intellectual, when they find something intellectually unsatisfying, right, it's like you're giving answers, but they're like, no, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't work.
Right.
Right. So when you give them something actually satisfying, you're meeting, in a sense, that internal need, right? Because they have a desire for internal and intellectual consistency.
Yes. Yeah, and just bringing up the topic of deconversion again. There's so many, according to research and stories, that weren't able weren't able to ask questions,
Hmm.
like substantive questions in their own church environment. They were just, or given, just have faith. We don't, like Marie, faith and reason don't go together. Don't do that. Or yeah, they just weren't, there wasn't space and there wasn't substance and there
Hmm.
wasn't safety. All 3 of those. They weren't, they weren't given satisfying answers to the questions they were having, and so they're like, "Well, I guess it's not here."
Hmm.
It's not here. They don't have it or else they would give it. But also to your point too, yeah, just that satisfaction is incredibly important for thinkers. They have to make sense. I mean, we have to make we want to make sense of the world around us and of the world within us. Some obviously are more thoughtful about that than others. Like you say, some just smile or just happy, and they don't have to set, they don't have to satisfy their curiosity about how the origin of the universe,
Well,
you know?
I don't think they have as much
Um,
of that curiosity.
um, yeah, yeah. So some really just don't go there, but that's probably the wrong person to answer the question, for
Yeah.
the intellectual seeker, and it really is a misstep. I think when some of it, I think, though, honestly, and this bears out in my study too, I think some Christians don't know what they don't know. They don't
Mhm.
know how to answer. They've never thought about
Yeah.
these issues deeply. They can't respond meaningfully to someone who's asking the deeper questions. But what is important is to know people who do,
Mhm.
like, hey, I can't answer that, but I know someone who does, or a good book, or whatever, rather than just have faith. I think that
Yes.
does, it's, as Greg Koukl would say, that's right-hearted but wrong-headed. It's not going to satisfy, and in fact, it might push someone away. So I think we need to be very cautious and nuanced, listen, and respond appropriately.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's a great travesty that more people haven't just said, "I don't know." I think that would save a lot of
Yes.
people, and so many of the friends that I've encountered as well that left for those questions and things like that, and I find it such a shame when, then I was like, "Well, what was the question?" Right? And it's, to me, of course, today, since I have studied a bunch, it's like those are very answerable questions. They weren't particularly, well, they're not particularly, to me, challenging or difficult. But it's exactly that thing where maybe the pastor in the church they went to, well, he wasn't that kind of person. He wasn't the big intellectual type. And I know some people expect pastors to be all things to all people. They're limited too. They're just people. Um, but yeah, like a lot of those questions, sometimes they have answers, uh, but people just haven't found them yet, you know? So it can be a real challenge. It can be a real challenge.
Yes.
So I want to know this. What's been the most rewarding part of this entire journey for you?
Rewarding. I think when you see people who honestly struggle,
Mhm.
it, well, I will say, for myself, I was personally convinced, like I said at the beginning, of the robust nature of the Christian worldview. But when you see people who are coming from an opposite perspective, who've really pushed back, didn't want it to be true, and then against all odds, through their pursuit of truth, find that the Christian worldview really is the best explanation for reality, I think it has deepened my faith. And my confidence in the Christian worldview. I've also been inspired by the passion, um, through which these former atheists are living. They in many times gave up a lot to move from their atheistic perspective. Sometimes they had to give up everything, everyone, every relationship that they knew, in order to embrace the reality of God in their lives, that they are so passionate. You are an example that in my study, all of them, all of them either were involved part-time in some kind of ministry or apologetics, or a third of them were moved full-time into further education, teaching, ministry, or apologetics, evangelism, something. They were so serious about and
Yeah.
passionate about truth, about helping others to know and find what they found, that I again, chills. I am constantly inspired by the faith of former atheists, and I just want to be like them, to be honest.
That's such an inspiring story for all of us. And I think that one of the major things that makes it so much more real for those of us who have been through it is that we've suffered. We've suffered. We understand the pain and agony of serious doubt, of skepticism, of thinking through the issues and wrestling with the issues and wrestling with God and wrestling with all of the existential struggles that we have inside. That, you know what, it reminds me of when Jesus is talking about, he's talking to Peter about the widow, right, who gives the 2 mites. And he asks her, right, which one, or no, it's the debts, right? Which one do you think loves more? The one who was forgiven much or the
Mm,
one who was forgiven little?
mm,
And I think for those of us who have struggled through these things and wrestled through them and what, given up a lot, for ourselves, we've changed a lot. We recognize that this is amazing and it's the best thing. And, you know, our gratefulness propels us forward, that we want to share what we found and how we have wrestled through the issues and found meaning and purpose and life. And we want other people to have that meaning and purpose and life. And so I think it's a beautiful thing to see someone come to Christ and know the consequences. And I think it's the struggle for some of those who haven't endured that to understand, yeah, what we all go through.
mm. Yeah.
So I think we will just about wrap up here. But so Jana has a podcast. So what is the title that everyone needs to search for to find your podcast?
It's called Side B Stories, where skeptics flip the record of their lives. So little reference there to a vinyl, if you're old enough like me to know what a vinyl record is, or I think there's some kind of retro interest in it as well. I mean, at least my daughters knew what that meant. But yeah, just looking on the other side, listening to the other side, flipping the record of your life. The the B side, which is a lot of people don't give the other perspective a listening or a hearing, but when they actually do, sometimes it becomes their favorite song. So, yeah, it's where skeptics flip the record of their life. Side B stories.
That's so cool. Yeah, I knew it was called Side B, but I didn't know that was why.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yep. And then of course, if you want, you can find, I think Jana's book is on Amazon. And I'll be sure to have all of her links in the description if you want to find out more about her. And yeah. And I think Jana, are you open? Like if you're an atheist and they want to, and they've converted to Christianity, you want to talk with them?
Absolutely. Send them my way, or you can email at info@sidebstories.com. Love to hear from anybody who would love to talk to me. Yeah. I also what we also provide on Side Stories, if you are a skeptic and you want to speak with any former skeptics or atheists who've been on my program, there's a lot of interest to I like to connect people who have questions with those who've been there.
Okay, so great. So you've also got resources for
Hmm.
atheists.
Hmm.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we will close out today's. And Jana, so glad to have you. It was really great to hear all of your great stories and your own journey of writing this book.
Yeah, it's a terrific conversation, Adam. I just am so grateful that you had me on.
All righty. Well, we'll see you guys next time.